Good morning. Good morning. Much better. Thank you. It's great to see everyone here this morning. It's almost time to begin our class. Before we do, we just need to make mention of those that are on the sick list and keep a lot of people in our prayers. Brother Terry told me this morning that he had received a phone call and the medicine that they had put him on was the wrong one for the strain of the infection he had, so they had to switch him up and put him on something else yesterday. So he's so just keep him in your prayers, and Janice, the Moody's, Lisa, everybody else. Colin is quarantined at home. He was at school, and supposedly somebody there that he may have been around tested positive. He tested negative, but he had to be home. And then also Stanhope didn't have school one day last week, at least one day last week, because so many people were quarantined. So let's keep all those folks in our prayers. Also keep the Obert family in our prayers. I just found out this morning that Brother Obert's father passed away Wednesday at the age of 93. So just keep that family in your prayers. Anyone else that would need to? Yes, ma'am. Well, since you mentioned that, we'd also mention Cassie, Colin's grandmother on the other side, that had all the issues, the spinal fluid infection, the broken hip. She's coming home tomorrow, but she has also tested positive for COVID. So she had to get it in a rehab facility or a hospital facility. So, because she's been there for over a month. Yes, ma'am. And, oh, yes, thank you so much. Jim called me this morning, and Diane is home having a low blood pressure issue. Chris is staying with her because Jim got called and had to go into the hotel to do some work, but her blood pressure this morning was systolic was in the 70s, and the distance the other way around. Anyway, it was about 70 something over 40 something. So that's extremely low. So keep her in your prayers. I had it right. Systolic, dystolic. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Brother Luke, would you lead us in a prayer then before we begin?
That's right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have this morning to come out to study for us with your word. We have a lot of people mentioned that being sick and need of prayer. Pray that you will be with them and put your healing hands on them. Be with us now and help us retain what has been taught here. We will use in our everyday life. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Class today is lesson number 3. It's going to be on Rehoboam and Jeroboam. We've talked quite a bit about these two individuals already, and we've talked, I guess, more about Rehoboam. And the question session on him today is 6 questions long. And then there's a common question with he and Jeroboam, and then the rest of it is on about 14 questions on Jeroboam. So the first thing we need to find out, we've talked about Solomon's influence on why the kingdom divided. And we talked about how Rehoboam was going to be a worse king or ruler than his dad, Solomon. He was going to make the it harsher on the people. We mentioned briefly about Jeroboam, how that he had worked for Solomon, that he had been over all of Ephraim, gathering the taxes and stuff like that together. And then that Solomon found out that he was going to be the ruler of 10 of the tribes, and got mad and attempted to kill him, and he had to go to Egypt. And then Solomon dies. Rehoboam is king. Jeroboam is now free to come back from Egypt. And if you look at the dating on all of the material, it says that the divided kingdom was in 931/930 BC. That does not mean that it started immediately upon Solomon's death, because as you read the literature, read the Bible, Jeroboam and the elders came to Rehoboam and tried to advise him and tell him how to do things, and he declined their knowledge and went with the younger knowledge and made the comment. So a short period of time, and we could be talking days, weeks, or months, but it didn't just immediately happen. It started in that progression that after Rehoboam had said, no, it's going to be rougher on you, then they chose Jeroboam to be the leader of those 10 tribes. We had also pointed out last week how the 10 tribes, or the 12 or so, were divided at the time, but those division lines are not in stone. It wasn't the territory that each of them had been given that made the dividing line, because Benjamin, that goes with Judah, Jeroboam is going to be, and we'll get to this later in some reading and questions and answers, but he's going to set up one of the temples in Bethel. Well, Bethel would have been in the northern part of Benjamin's territory, just almost on the border there. So it's, Andrew, every time weather comes on and they talk about storms and put warnings out, they always use county lines as the marker. And she always says, how does that storm know where the county starts and stops? It sort of wiggles around, and that's the way the kingdom was divided. So the first question I have for you, now that we reminded ourselves of that part, was Jeroboam a good king or a bad king over the northern 10 tribes, if we want to call them that? Good king? Bad king. All kings of the north were bad, so he was a bad king. Since he was the first one and he was chosen by the people, I'm not going to say it's like a democracy. I'm not going to say that they had a vote and the whole 10 tribes voted him in. It just says that the elders got with him and appointed him as the king. So what motivated him to reign the way he did as being a bad king? What was the one motivational factor that caused him to do all the things that he did? There's one verse, I think, that explicitly tells us. If you'll go to 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings chapter 12, and we're going to look at verse 27, and then we're going to back up and read a couple more verses. But in verse 27, I think it answers that question. It says, and this is Jeroboam speaking, if this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah. Next phrase, very important. And they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So, all the things that he was going to do during his 22-year reign, personally, I believe was out of this verse right here. He was afraid they were going to kill him, and if they killed him, they would go back to a united kingdom. Now, if we back up and start with verse 25, sort of tell the whole story, it says, Then Jeroboam built Shechem in Mount Ephraim, and dwelt therein, and went out from thence and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. So his intent was that he was going to do things to have all the people be in step with the way David, his grandfather, would have ruled. However, immediately then we come to the next verse where it says, but if the people are allowed to go back to Jerusalem to worship, what's going to happen? And if that happens, I'm going to be the outcast. They're going to kill me. And then it's going to be united again. And you can sort of see that in what happens today when somebody gets a little off track in anything, and then somebody influences them and teaches them and gets them back on path. So here they were going to diverge and go the wrong way. The next verse of 28 says, Whereupon the king took counsel, made 2 calves of gold, said unto them, It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold, thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. Now that will be in that'll be in Exodus chapter 32, talking about the golden calf. But here in verse 28, look what it said. The king took counsel. Well, who did he take counsel with? It doesn't say, but we already know that he refused the counsel of the elders and went with the way of his contemporaries. So by him taking counsel here, would that not at least hint at that he's still going with his contemporaries, his pals, his buddies to seek advice? Jeroboam we're talking about. Rehoboam, excuse me, yes, I mixed them up there. But who is he taking counsel from? I had those two mixed up, I'm sorry. Jeroboam, who would have been the ones that he was taking counsel from? The wrong ones, but the ones that apparently appointed him to be the king, right? He made 2 calves instead of the one, like back in the book of Exodus. And he told the folks, It's too much for you to go to Jerusalem. Behold, thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee out of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and he put the other in Dan. Bethel, I just mentioned, was on the northern fringe of what would have been Benjamin in the divided territory. Where is Dan that was set up? Remember we talked last week about there being 2 Dans, one that would have been close to Ephraim and then one way up north that they'd gone and conquered, and it was in the northern portion. Now, if you look at this verse very carefully, what reason did he give for setting up 2 temples? It's too far to go. Where exactly is Bethel in relationship to Jerusalem? Very short distance. Remember, Benjamin is the smallest tribe. And Jerusalem was on the border of Benjamin and Judah. Bethel was on the border of Benjamin and Ephraim. And then way up north to Dan, he establishes another temple. Those two temples are 100 miles apart, roughly 100 miles apart as the crow flies. One on the very, very, very northern portion and one on the very, very, very southern portion. And the one on the southern portion is just a little distance from Jerusalem. So here he's using a false argument or a false conclusion. It's too far for you to go to Jerusalem. You go to one of these two places. And he also was imitating or trying to imitate their religion. Even though he set up false idols, calves, he was still trying to get them to go to temples. So, questions, comments so far? Yes, sir. But he doesn't, well, he said he made them here or they made them here. So Aaron sort of said it just popped out, but still Egypt was there. And it's amazing as you study the Bible how much influence Egypt really has from the beginning to the end. All the people that went down for protection, for famine, for protection from harm. Here, Jeroboam went down there for protection from harm. Who else do we know of that went to Egypt for protection from harm? Joseph, Mary, and Christ. Okay. Why the calf? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. The cow, is a pagan symbol. It was around during Egypt, but why they chose the thing is, I think he chose it because it represented what, here's the next lie that he told. When he said, behold thy gods. How many gods are there? Should be singular, there's one God. But thy gods which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. So that takes us back to the story in Exodus. Why was the golden calf produced there? They thought Moses had abandoned them. He was gone for 40 days. So now they have to have a God. And what did they refer to that one as? The one that was going to take them back to Egypt. So here it's tying in with the one that led them out of Egypt. So he told several fibs in this one section. He is setting up similar worship to the way they were used to. He made gods. He told them it was too far to go. So all these things are leading up to, and what happens today? When people, there's a difference between the word imitate and copy. What does the word copy mean? Reproduce, be the same, facsimile as we used to call them. But what does imitate mean? I'm sorry? To behave like, not the same, but behave similar to. So he's trying to set up a similar religion here so they'll think they're going to be okay. Counterfeit would be a better word. Absolutely. He is setting up a counterfeit religion. But see, it works that way today when people come in to, if we go to the New Testament, like wolves in sheep's clothing. What do people do when they come into a congregation to change things? They first look like the real thing, and then they slowly start working off into the not real thing. And here he's doing all of this. Verse 30, and this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan, and that's the Dan of the north that we was talking about. And he made an house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not the sons of Levi. Now that phrase, the lowest of the people, that does not mean that he went out on the streets and necessarily and got the beggars and the thieves and the murderers. It just means that they were not of the correct tribe. They were not of the tribe of Levi. So he's setting up priests, setting up temples, setting up gods. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, and on the 15th day of the month, likened to the feast that is in Judah. And he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priest of the high places which he had made. So he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised of his own heart. To me, that's a key phrase, which he had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel, and he offered upon the altar and burnt incense. So what all has he done to counterfeit or imitate or make the people think that they're going to be okay following this religion? He copied their feast, he copied their temples, except for the calves. He made it mandatory that they be at certain places at certain times. He ordained priests, even though they were not of the correct tribe. And later we'll find out that he even ordained himself, which he wasn't of the tribe of Ephraim, not of the tribe of Levi. So all these things he did to imitate or set up or to keep people from going back to Jerusalem, back to the true religion. Can we see any similarities in that with our politics of today? We're not going to get political here, but I'm just mentioning it because half the country is on this side of the fence and half the country is on this side of the fence. And where there used to be people being able to disagree without being disagreeable with each other, we don't find that anymore. Some people think that those that don't study history, they think that all of this mess that's going on right now in our country started yesterday or last week or last month. But if we go all the way back into the 1950s, one of my uncles was partners in a clothing store in Scottsboro, Alabama. And because of the election that was coming up, people had him so nervous about the election that the one that was going to win it, we would be in a recession, that he sold his half of the store. And the rest of his life, working life, he spent working as a department store manager of a department. If we go into the 60s, when JFK won the election against Nixon, the political machine in Chicago was in full swing. Many say that Nixon actually won the election, but because of all the numbers and everything that showed Kennedy, Nixon, even though all the things that he did bad later when he was elected, he let it go and conceded the election because he said it would be better for the country. We come up a few years later, Gore and Bush in Florida. That went all the way up to the Supreme Court. 50-something days later, they finally agreed that it would let stand the way it was let stand. And we can go on up to when Trump won the election. Even before he won the election, there were certain people from the time he was elected till now, and even after he is out of office in 6 days or so, 4 days. Today's the 17th, 3 days. 3 days when he's out of office, there will still be a group of people that say he was an illegitimate president. There are people on this other side that say that the one that is going to take the oath of office on the 20th is an illegitimate. There is no harmony. The same thing is happening with us, not necessarily in the same order, or won't go to that extent, because my hope, my prayer is that people will step back, relax, take a breath, and get on with their lives in a peaceful manner. Whether you like it or not, Joe Biden is going to be inaugurated president in 3 days. He is the president of the United States. End of conversation. We don't need to start another 1862. What we're talking about in the book of Kings here was an American 1862, the nation divided. Questions, comments? Chapter 13 then goes into where it says, a man of God came out of Judah by the word unto Bethel, and Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. Now this to stand by the altar meant that he stood in the place where the ordained priests took their position when they offered sacrifices. So he not only has ordained priests from the non-Levitical tribes, he himself is playing the role of a priest. And this goes on down to, if we'll look at verse 2, and then we're going to get over to the questions and answers, and we may back up if we need to. But here, this person that came cried against the altar in the word of the Lord and said, O altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name. And upon thee shall he offer the priest of the high places that burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burned thereon. Now, just for a quick history of this, Jeroboam was a later king. He began to reign at the age of 8. Personally, I don't know how anybody can be a ruler at the age of 8, but if we go back in history, we see that in England, Spain, a few other places. But here, Josiah is going to start ruling at the age of 8, and he will reign for about 40 years. Not 40. About 31 years, excuse me. He starts ruling about 640 and goes to about 609. So at 640, where are we now when we're talking about the kingdom dividing? What year did we say the kingdom divided? And we're talking about Jeroboam here. We're talking at 931. So if it doesn't happen at 931, but a few years into his reign, and Jeroboam only ruled 22 years, we're still almost, this is a prediction or prophecy, almost 300 years in advance of what will actually take place. So, and as we read the rest of chapter 13, we find out that this wise man, prophet, was asked to dine with and stay with and eat and drink, and he refused because God had told him not to. But then as he goes on his way, another prophet goes and lies to him and tells him he's a prophet and that an angel spoke to him and told him to come back. And he went back, and then he is killed by a lion after he leaves that place. And then we find out later that bones are burned on that particular burial site. One key thing in there is that the prophet that lied to him and brought him back lives, and the prophet that was talking to Jeroboam here about Josiah was killed. Why do you think that took place? Why punish the supposedly good guy and let the bad guy that told the lie live? That is absolutely correct. I hadn't thought of that. I had gone all the way back into the book of Genesis. I had gone back to Eve. God quoted basically what Eve quoted what God had told her, thou shalt not eat. She even added, thou shalt not touch. Said, oh, that's not exactly right. If you had been in the place of the prophet here, where God tells you to do something, and then man tells you to do something, what are you supposed to go with? This Bible tells us exactly what we're supposed to do. If I close this Bible and say, I've really been studying on that subject, and Terry and I have been talking, and, Terry and I have come to an agreement that let's just use one of the things that is prominent today in the congregation. It would sound so much better if we got all these groups together and put a mic on them, and the ladies can sit here and they can sing their part. Won't that sound better? That's okay. It's also okay since Sister Janice knows so much more about music than most of the rest of us. She can take the leading role. She knows how to pitch the songs and all, so that'd be okay. I've been an elder for 30 years. Terry's been an elder for a long time. Hopefully y'all respect both of us. You gonna go with us on that subject then? Thank you, thank you, thank you. You go by what God has said, not what somebody else is going to tell you. So if God, I know it won't happen, or came down and spoke directly to me today and told me to do something, nothing anybody says is going to stop me from doing what he said. That comes directly from the source. Questions, comments? It must have been funny. You want to repeat it?
Well, I could say God did not listen to that.
Okay, let's see if we can get some of these questions answered in. We covered some of it, but not all of it. I hope everybody has copies of the lesson and doing some study on your own. But the first question is, how did Rehoboam strengthen his kingdom? When we're switching gears now, we're going from Jeroboam back to Rehoboam. So when Rehoboam was appointed king, how did he strengthen his kingdom? And we can find that in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, verses 5 through 12. He built cities for defense. He fortified them, stocked both equipment and supplies. What's the difference between equipment and supplies? Food versus armament. Absolutely. If y'all recall, in a lesson I did a couple of years, well, I guess it's been going on a couple of years ago now, when I was talking about the Army coming down to Tennessee and rounded up the Cherokee people and marching them or walking them over to Oklahoma, how that the Army was ill-equipped and ill-supplied. Same thing. They didn't have the equipment needed for the trip, the number of wagons or whatever, and they also didn't have the food. So ill-equipped and ill-supplied. Question number 2. Why did the Levites and those of other tribes migrate to Judah? Now, this is sort of one of those questions that we've talked about. You can find the answer also in 2 Chronicles, but what have we just covered about Jeroboam? Setting up false worship, trying to prevent people from doing things. Brother Jeremy, if you don't like what's going on where you live, we won't even say the city, county, or state, but just the actual location you live. If your neighbors get to the point where you feel like you're in danger or just don't want to have anything to do with them, a bunch of druggies move in, cops won't take care of them, whatever, what are you going to do? You going to stay there and fight it? Take care of the problem or leave. If the problem is too large to take care of, you only have one option. So a lot of the people in the Northern Territory, because of what was going on, they wanted that true religion, so they migrated south. The same thing would happen on the flip side. There would be some in the south that would be enticed to go north. So there was a migration that took place during this time. But those, in essence. But the people of the Levites, they were the truer ones, so they went south. How long did Judah walk in the way of David? I'm sorry? 3 years. Find that in 2 Chronicles 11:17. What sins did Judah commit? And describe Rehoboam. We can find that in a couple of places. If we'll go to 1 Kings chapter 14 and verses 21, starting, and Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord did choose out of the tribes of Israel to put his name there, and his mother's name was Naaman, an Ammonitess. And Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins, which they had committed above all that their fathers had done. So even though the chosen city was Jerusalem and Judah, Rehoboam was in charge, what did we just read that said what was the sin? Did evil in the sight of the Lord. So they did not keep to the law of the Lord for whatever, reading between the lines or for whatever reason. And then what occurred, what was the result of that sin because of their transgressions? What happened in Judah? As a hint, this also involves Egypt. Shishak, the king, the one that had protected Jeroboam when Solomon was after him, Shishak went into Judah, burned parts of it, attacked it, robbed the temples in Jerusalem. So how was the wrath of the Lord turned from Judah and Rehoboam? Now there's a specific verse that tells us this, 2 Chronicles 12, verses 5 through 8 and 12. However, just reason this one out for just a moment. How was the wrath of God turned from Judah and Rehoboam? If we look at all the things that happened in the Old Testament, how many times people angered God and caused God to do something not nice to them? What always removed that wrath of God? I'm sorry? Repentance and being humble themselves before. So, and then the seventh question deals with both Rehoboam and Jeroboam. It says, how long did Rehoboam and Jeroboam war against each other? I can give you a specific number of years, but I can also just give you an inclusive period of time. I'm sorry? Continually all their life, and since Rehoboam only reigned for 17 years, that puts a specific number on it. But they were continually at war. Now we switch, and we'll be looking at Jeroboam. And we have read a lot of this, so it should make it easier to answer the questions. How did Jeroboam corrupt the worship of God? I listed this 2 or 3 different times. Sorry? Idols, priest, temples, counterfeit worship. What did the man of God who came out of Judah prophesy to Jeroboam? Remember, we just talked about that. That was the birth of Josiah, a few years, 300 years later, thereabouts, and what would take place. And then it says, what sign did he give? I see Jeremy counting, so we're not going to make it through all of these, but I do think it important here to talk about number 3. In 1 Kings 13 and verse 3, what sign did he give? And that is, he had come and told Jeroboam that Josiah would be born about 300 years later. That's a prophecy. Why give a sign immediately to, if you're going to give a prophecy 300 years in the future, why do you also give somebody a sign? Proof. Let them know you're speaking of the proof. And what sign did he give? The altar was broken and the ashes poured out. Okay? Question 4 is, what happened to Jeroboam's hand? What happened to Jeroboam's hand? Withered and dried up. Why did it wither and dry up? What was going on when that took place? He put out his hand to basically say, take the prophet, get rid of this man. So when he put his hand out as a sign that he was going to do harm to somebody sent from God, his hand withered up. What did Jeroboam ask the man of God after that? Now he's turned from saying, get rid of him, to asking him a favor. What did he ask him? Restore my hand. Did he? Yep. Number 7, what had God commanded the man of God? Other than going and telling Jeroboam what was going to take place. Remember, I said that he had been told not to go in and eat with, stay with, have anything to do with. How did the old prophet convince the man of God to come to his house? Told you that one too. Pardon? He lied to him. What was the lie? That an angel had spoken to him. He was a prophet, but he lied when he said the angel had spoken to him. What occurred as they were eating? What was taking place while they were eating? Pardon? Sorry?
Prophet told him he was in trouble, basically, because he didn't listen. His bones would not return to his forefathers.
There you go. And number 10, what happened to the man of God as he was returning to Judah? Exactly what God said. He was killed by a lion. Did the lion eat him? He was left intact. Also, the donkey that was there was not harmed by the lion. Only what God said, that he would be killed. 11, when the old prophet heard the report concerning the man of God and investigated, what did he find? I went ahead of you. I answered that one. That the lion and the donkey were standing by the carcass and the lion had not eaten. Where did the old prophet bury the man of God? In his own tomb. How did Jeroboam continue in his evil way, and what was the results?
Says that he continued to appoint those as priests that were low people. Basically, anybody who volunteered, he would consecrate and have them serve them.
And what was the results? He would be cut off. He would be destroyed. They're coming in, but very briefly, what happened from there with the child that was born? It died, and so that started that. Thank y'all so much for your questions and comments and attention. And next lesson is going to be Abijam, Jeroboam, and Asa. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and get to some other people. Thank y'all again.